The journey into personal freedom begins with a simple yet profound realization that most human suffering does not come directly from the outside world, but is created within the mind through learned beliefs and conditioned patterns of thinking. From the moment a human being is born, there is a natural state of openness, curiosity, and emotional authenticity. A child does not judge itself, does not compare, and does not carry the burden of self-doubt. However, as time passes, this natural state begins to change through a process that can be described as mental conditioning. Family, society, religion, and education collectively shape the individual's understanding of reality. Through repeated exposure to rules, expectations, rewards, and punishments, a system of beliefs is formed. This system operates like an invisible framework that dictates how a person should think, feel, and behave. Approval becomes associated with being good, while disapproval becomes linked with being wrong or unworthy. Gradually, an internal voice develops, one that constantly evaluates, criticizes, and judges. This voice becomes so familiar that it is often mistaken for truth, even though it is merely a reflection of learned ideas. These learned ideas can be understood as agreements, silent promises that a person makes with themselves and the world without conscious awareness. These agreements define identity, self-worth, and perception. They influence how a person interprets situations, responds to challenges, and relates to others. The problem is that most of these agreements are not based on objective truth, but on subjective experiences and external influences.
Because these agreements are accepted without question, they create limitations and suffering. The key to transformation lies in recognizing that these agreements are not fixed realities. They are learned, and anything that is learned can be changed. To move toward freedom, new agreements must be consciously created. These new agreements are not imposed from outside, but chosen from within, based on awareness, truth, and intention. One of the most powerful aspects of this transformation begins with understanding the role of language. Words are far more than simple tools for communication. They are instruments of creation that shape perception and influence emotional experience. A single word can uplift or destroy, inspire hope or create fear. Words spoken by others, especially during early life, often become internalized beliefs that shape identity. For example, if a person repeatedly hears negative statements about themselves, those statements begin to feel real. They form a mental narrative that influences behavior and self-image. The impact of language is not limited to communication with others. It also includes the internal dialogue that takes place within the mind. This inner conversation is often filled with judgment, criticism, and doubt. It reinforces old agreements and keeps the individual trapped in cycles of negativity. To break this cycle, language must be used consciously and responsibly. Speaking truthfully is not simply about avoiding lies. It involves expressing thoughts with clarity and integrity, while avoiding the use of words as tools of harm. Gossip, blame, and self-criticism weaken both the speaker and the listener. When words are aligned with truth and positivity, they become a source of healing and transformation.
Alongside language, another major source of suffering arises from the tendency to take things personally. Human beings often interpret the actions and words of others as direct reflections of themselves. A comment, a gesture, or even a tone of voice can trigger emotional reactions. However, this interpretation is often inaccurate. Each individual lives within their own mental world, shaped by personal experiences, beliefs, and emotions. What a person says or does is influenced by their internal state, not by the worth of someone else. When someone expresses anger or criticism, it reflects their own struggles, rather than an objective truth about another person. Taking such behavior personally creates unnecessary pain and gives external opinions power over internal peace. Freedom begins when this pattern is understood and broken, By recognizing that most actions are not about oneself, emotional stability increases. This does not mean becoming indifferent or detached, but rather becoming aware. It allows a person to observe without reacting impulsively. The need for constant approval diminishes, and self-worth becomes independent of external validation. Another deeply ingrained habit that contributes to misunderstanding and conflict is the tendency to make assumptions. The human mind naturally seeks certainty. When information is incomplete, it fills in the gaps by creating stories and explanations. These assumptions feel real because they are supported by emotions and past experiences. However, they are often incorrect. Misunderstandings arise when assumptions are treated as facts. A person may believe that someone is upset with them without any clear evidence. This belief then influences behavior, leading to tension and conflict. In reality, the other person may be dealing with unrelated issues. Assumptions create a distorted version of reality that leads to unnecessary suffering. To overcome this, clarity must be prioritized. Instead of guessing, one must communicate. Asking questions and expressing thoughts openly reduces confusion and builds understanding. Although this requires courage, it prevents emotional pain caused by false interpretations.
Finally, true transformation requires action. Understanding these ideas intellectually is not enough. Change occurs through consistent practice. Effort plays a central role, but it must be approached with balance. Many people believe that success requires perfection, which creates pressure and self-criticism. When expectations are not met, disappointment follows. A healthier approach is to focus on doing one's best. This does not mean achieving perfection, but applying genuine effort according to one's current ability and circumstances. The concept of best is flexible. It varies depending on energy levels, emotional state, and external conditions. Some days, the best may involve high productivity, while on other days, it may simply mean maintaining basic responsibilities. Accepting this variation creates self-compassion and reduces stress. When a person consistently does their best, regret fades because there is a sense of honesty in effort. This builds self-trust, which is essential for long-term growth. As self-trust increases, dependence on external validation decreases. Decisions become clearer and more aligned with personal values. Over time, the old agreements begin to lose their power. The internal critic becomes quieter, and the mind becomes less reactive. Emotional balance improves, and a sense of inner freedom develops. This transformation does not happen instantly. It is a gradual process that requires awareness and patience. Each moment presents a choice between following old patterns or applying new understanding. With consistent practice, these small choices accumulate and create lasting change. A new way of living emerges, one that is not controlled by fear.
To understand the depth of human suffering, it becomes necessary to explore how the mind is shaped long before a person becomes aware of it. This shaping process can be described as a form of domestication, where an individual is trained to fit into a system of expectations. From childhood, rewards are given for behaviors that align with social norms, and punishments are given for behaviors that do not. Over time, this creates a powerful internal system where the individual begins to control themselves in order to gain approval and avoid rejection. This self-regulation is not based on natural truth, but on fear and conditioning. Fear becomes one of the strongest forces governing human behavior. It operates quietly but constantly, influencing decisions, reactions, and relationships. The fear of not being good enough, the fear of being judged, the fear of being rejected, and the fear of failure all stem from the same root, the need for acceptance. This fear creates a false identity, one that tries to meet external expectations rather than express authentic self. As a result, many people live lives that are disconnected from their true desires and inner clarity. This conditioned identity is reinforced by an internal dialogue that constantly evaluates every action. There is a voice that judges and another that receives the judgment. This creates an inner conflict where a person is both the critic and the victim. The critic sets impossible standards and punishes failure, while the victim experiences guilt, shame, and self-doubt. This internal struggle drains energy and creates emotional exhaustion. Breaking free from this cycle requires awareness of how this system operates. It begins with recognizing that the inner critic is not an absolute authority, but a product of learned beliefs. When this realization takes place, a space is created between the individual and their thoughts. This space allows observation without immediate reaction. Instead of automatically believing every negative thought, one can begin to question it.
Questioning these thoughts weakens their power. It exposes the fact that many of them are based on assumptions, past experiences, or inherited beliefs, rather than present reality. As this awareness grows, the individual gains the ability to choose which thoughts to accept and which to release. This is where true mental freedom begins. Emotional healing becomes an important part of this process. Many reactions are not caused by present situations, but by unresolved emotions from the past. A simple comment or action can trigger a strong response because it connects to an old wound. These wounds often relate to rejection, humiliation, or feelings of inadequacy experienced earlier in life. Without awareness, these emotional patterns repeat themselves. Healing requires facing these emotions rather than avoiding them. Avoidance may provide temporary comfort, but it does not resolve the underlying issue. When emotions are acknowledged and understood, their intensity begins to decrease. This does not mean reliving pain endlessly, but observing it without judgment. Over time, emotional reactions become less automatic and more conscious. Another important aspect of transformation is the release of the need for control. Many people try to control situations, outcomes, and even other people in order to feel secure. However, this need for control often leads to frustration because reality does not always align with expectations. When control is prioritized over acceptance, resistance is created. This resistance leads to stress and dissatisfaction. Acceptance does not mean passivity or lack of effort. It means recognizing reality as it is without unnecessary resistance. When reality is accepted, energy is no longer wasted on fighting what cannot be changed. This energy can then be directed toward meaningful action. Acceptance creates clarity, and clarity leads to better decisions.
Relationships also transform when these principles are applied. Many conflicts arise not because of actual differences, but because of misunderstandings, assumptions, and emotional reactions. When a person stops taking things personally and avoids making assumptions, communication becomes clearer and more honest. This reduces unnecessary conflict and creates stronger connections. Another shift occurs when the need for approval is reduced. When self-worth is no longer dependent on others' opinions, relationships become more genuine. Instead of seeking validation, a person can express themselves authentically. This authenticity creates deeper trust and mutual respect. Consistency plays a crucial role in maintaining these changes. It is easy to understand these ideas intellectually, but applying them daily requires effort and awareness. There will be moments of failure, moments where old patterns reappear. This is a natural part of the process. The key is not perfection, but persistence. Each time awareness is applied, even in a small way, progress is made. Over time, these small moments of awareness accumulate and create a shift in perception. The mind becomes calmer, reactions become more controlled, and emotional stability increases. As this transformation deepens, a sense of inner peace begins to develop. This peace is not dependent on external circumstances. It is not affected by temporary challenges or changing situations. It comes from within, from the understanding that thoughts and emotions do not have to control behavior. Each time awareness is applied, even in a small way, progress is made.
Over time, these small moments of awareness accumulate and create a shift in perception. The mind becomes calmer, reactions become more controlled, and emotional stability increases. As this transformation deepens, a sense of inner peace begins to develop. This peace is not dependent on external circumstances. It is not affected by temporary challenges or changing situations. It comes from within, from the understanding that thoughts and emotions do not have to control behavior. This inner peace creates a new way of experiencing life. Challenges are still present, but they are approached with clarity rather than fear. Mistakes are seen as opportunities for growth rather than reasons for self-judgment. The past loses its hold, and the future becomes less intimidating. Freedom, in this sense, is not about escaping responsibility or avoiding difficulties. It is about living without the unnecessary burden of fear, judgment, and false beliefs. It is about being able to respond to life with awareness rather than reacting unconsciously. As these ideas are practiced consistently, the old agreements continue to weaken and the new ones become stronger. This process is gradual, but its impact is profound. It reshapes identity, perception, and experience. Life becomes less about struggle and more about understanding.
As awareness deepens and the foundations of old beliefs begin to weaken, the practical application of the new agreements becomes essential. Transformation is not achieved through understanding alone, but through consistent action in daily life. Each of the 4 agreements serves as a guide for behavior, perception, and response. When practiced together, they create a powerful shift in how reality is experienced. The first agreement, being impeccable with one's word, extends far beyond simply speaking truth. It involves complete responsibility for the energy carried through language. Words are a reflection of thought, and thought shapes perception. When words are used carelessly, they reinforce negativity and confusion. When they are used consciously, they create clarity and alignment. In daily life, this means avoiding gossip, resisting the urge to criticize unnecessarily, and becoming aware of self-talk. The way a person speaks to themselves has a direct impact on confidence, motivation, and emotional stability. Replacing negative internal dialogue with honest and supportive language gradually changes the way the mind functions. This agreement also requires courage. Speaking truthfully does not always mean saying what is easy or comfortable. It means expressing thoughts with integrity while maintaining respect. It means choosing silence when words may cause harm and choosing clarity when confusion may arise. Over time, this practice builds trust, both within oneself and in relationships with others.
The second agreement, not taking anything personally, becomes a powerful tool for emotional protection. In everyday situations, people often react based on how they interpret others' behavior. A simple comment can be seen as criticism, a delayed response can be interpreted as rejection, and a difference in opinion can feel like a personal attack. These reactions are not caused by reality itself, but by interpretation. When a person understands that others act according to their own beliefs and emotional states, the need to internalize these actions disappears. This creates a sense of emotional independence. Instead of reacting immediately, there is space to observe and understand. This does not mean ignoring feedback or becoming disconnected from others. It means filtering external input through awareness rather than emotion. Constructive feedback can still be accepted, but it is no longer confused with personal worth. This shift reduces conflict and prevents unnecessary suffering. The third agreement, avoiding assumptions, brings clarity to communication and relationships. Many problems arise not because of actual issues, but because of imagined ones. The mind creates stories to fill gaps in understanding, and these stories often lead to misunderstanding. In practical terms, this agreement encourages asking questions, expressing needs clearly, and seeking direct communication.
Instead of assuming what someone else is thinking or feeling, there is an effort to understand their perspective. This approach requires openness and humility. It involves accepting that one's perception may not always be accurate. By replacing assumptions with communication, misunderstandings are reduced and relationships become stronger. Clarity replaces confusion, and trust begins to grow.
The fourth agreement, always doing one's best, brings balance to all actions. Without this agreement, the other three can become sources of pressure. A person may try to speak perfectly, avoid every emotional reaction, or eliminate all assumptions, which can lead to frustration. The idea of doing one's best removes the need for perfection. It allows effort to be genuine rather than forced. In daily life, this means accepting that performance will vary. Energy levels change, emotions fluctuate, and circumstances differ. Some days, the best may involve high productivity and focus. Other days, it may involve rest and self-care. By accepting this variation, self-judgment decreases. Instead of criticizing oneself for not meeting unrealistic standards, there is an understanding that effort is enough. This agreement also reinforces consistency. When a person commits to doing their best, they continue to move forward regardless of temporary setbacks. Mistakes are no longer seen as failures, but as part of the learning process. This creates resilience and strengthens self-trust. As these agreements are practiced together, a noticeable shift occurs in daily experience. Reactions become less intense, thoughts become clearer, and emotions become more stable. Situations that once caused stress or conflict begin to feel manageable. The mind becomes less occupied with judgment and more focused on awareness. Relationships improve as well. Communication becomes more honest, misunderstandings decrease, and emotional reactions are reduced. Instead of trying to control others or seek approval, a person begins to interact from a place of authenticity. This creates deeper and more meaningful connections. Another important change is the reduction of internal conflict. The constant battle between the inner critic and the self begins to fade. As self-awareness increases, the critic loses its authority. Thoughts are no longer accepted automatically, but are evaluated consciously. This creates a sense of inner harmony. Over time, these changes lead to a deeper level of freedom. This freedom is not dependent on external success, approval, or circumstances. It is an internal state that comes from understanding and managing one's own mind. Life is no longer controlled by fear, assumptions, or emotional reactions. Challenges still exist, but they are approached differently. Instead of reacting impulsively, there is a pause, a moment of awareness that allows for thoughtful response. This pause creates space for better decisions and reduces unnecessary stress. As this practice continues, the new agreements become natural. They are no longer efforts, but habits. The mind adapts to this new way of thinking, and the old patterns gradually disappear. This transformation is not immediate, but it is steady and lasting. The result is a life that feels lighter, clearer, and more intentional. There is less struggle and more understanding, less fear and more confidence, less confusion and more clarity. This is the essence of personal freedom, a state where the mind serves the individual rather than controlling them.
As the practice of these agreements becomes consistent, a deeper transformation begins to unfold, one that goes beyond behavior and enters the level of identity itself. The person who once reacted unconsciously to every situation gradually becomes someone who observes, understands, and then responds with awareness. This shift may appear subtle from the outside, but internally it represents a profound change. The mind, which once operated on automatic patterns of fear, judgment, and assumption, begins to function with clarity and intention. At this stage, the concept of truth becomes central. Truth is no longer something imposed from external sources, but something experienced internally
through awareness. When a person aligns with truth, there is no need to defend, justify, or prove anything. Actions and words naturally reflect authenticity. This alignment removes inner conflict because there is no contradiction between what is felt and what is expressed. Life becomes simpler, not because challenges disappear, but because resistance to reality decreases. One of the most significant outcomes of this transformation is the release of emotional suffering tied to the past. Many people carry memories of pain, regret, or disappointment that continue to influence present behavior. These memories often act as invisible filters through which current experiences are interpreted. By practicing awareness and applying the agreements, the emotional charge attached to these memories begins to dissolve. The past no longer controls the present. It becomes a source of learning rather than a source of pain.
Forgiveness plays an important role in this process. Forgiveness is not about excusing harmful actions or forgetting what has happened. It is about releasing the emotional burden associated with those experiences. Holding on to resentment keeps the mind connected to past pain, while forgiveness creates space for peace. This applies not only to others, but also to oneself. Self-forgiveness allows the individual to move forward without being trapped in guilt or self-judgment. As emotional burdens are released, a sense of lightness emerges. This lightness is often described as inner peace, but it is more than just the absence of stress. It is a stable state of awareness where thoughts and emotions are present but do not dominate. There is a quiet confidence that comes from knowing that external events do not have the power to disturb inner balance unless they are allowed to do so. Another important aspect of this stage is the ability to live fully in the present moment. The mind often oscillates between past regrets and future anxieties, rarely settling in the present. This constant movement creates restlessness and dissatisfaction. When awareness is strengthened, attention naturally returns to the present. This does not mean ignoring the future or forgetting the past, but it means not being controlled by them. Decisions are made based on current reality rather than fear or memory. Living in the present enhances the quality of experience. Simple moments become more meaningful, and attention becomes more focused. There is less distraction from unnecessary thoughts and more engagement with what is actually happening. This creates a deeper sense of fulfillment.
At this level of understanding, relationships also reach a new depth. Interactions are no longer driven by neediness, control, or fear of loss. Instead, they are based on respect, honesty, and mutual understanding. There is an acceptance of others as they are, without the constant desire to change or control them. This acceptance does not mean tolerating harmful behavior, but it means recognizing that each person is responsible for their own choices. Love, in this context, becomes an expression of freedom rather than attachment. It is no longer conditional upon behavior or expectations. It is given without the need for validation and received without dependency. This form of love creates healthy and balanced relationships where both individuals maintain their independence while sharing connection. As the old agreements fade and the new ones become deeply integrated, a sense of personal mastery develops. This mastery is not about controlling others or dominating situations, but about understanding and managing one's own mind. It is the ability to remain centered in the face of challenges, to act with clarity rather than confusion, and to maintain inner peace regardless of external conditions. This state of being is often described as freedom, but it is important to understand that it is not a final destination. It is an ongoing process that requires continuous awareness. Life will always present new situations, new challenges, and new opportunities for growth. The agreements serve as tools that can be applied repeatedly in different contexts. There will still be moments of difficulty, moments where old patterns resurface or where emotions become intense. However, the difference lies in how these moments are handled,
Instead of being overwhelmed, there was an ability to step back, observe, and choose a response. This ability is the essence of conscious living.
Over time, this way of living creates a stable foundation for happiness. Happiness is no longer dependent on external achievements, approval, or circumstances. It becomes an internal state that arises from clarity, acceptance, and self-awareness. This does not mean that external success or relationships are unimportant, but it means they are no longer the sole source of fulfillment. In the end, the essence of this teaching lies in simplicity. The four agreements are not complex theories, but practical principles that can be applied in everyday life. Their power lies not in their complexity, but in their consistency. When practiced with sincerity and patience, they gradually transform the way a person thinks, feels, and lives. The journey is not about becoming perfect, but about becoming aware. It is about recognizing the patterns that create suffering and choosing differently. It is about replacing fear with understanding, judgment with acceptance, and confusion with clarity. Through this process, life becomes less about struggle and more about conscious experience. This is the true meaning of personal freedom, a life where the mind is no longer a source of limitation, but a tool for awareness, growth, and peace.